The morning sky over Tokyo burns crimson on April 7th, 1945. Captain Masao Suenaga adjusts his leather flight gloves inside the cramped cockpit of his Ki-84 Hayate fighter, the most advanced aircraft in the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force arsenal. At Chofu Airfield, 20 miles west of the capital, he can hear the distant rumble that has become all too familiar. Another wave of American B-29 superfortresses approaching from the south. But something is different today. Suenaga's radio crackles with confused voices from ground control. Unknown fighters, silver aircraft, approaching from the southeast. The veteran pilot furrows his brow. Southeast? That's impossible. The nearest American fighter base is over 600 miles away on Saipan, far beyond the range of any escort fighter he's ever encountered. The 28-year-old squadron commander has been flying combat missions for 3 years. He's faced everything the Americans have thrown at them. P-38 Lightnings over the Philippines, F-6F Hellcats from carrier raids, even the new F-4U Corsairs at Okinawa. But those encounters happened near American bases or aircraft carriers. Here, over the heart of Japan itself, Japanese fighters have always ruled supreme. His ground crew chief, Sergeant Yamamoto, pounds frantically on the side of his cockpit. Captain, emergency scramble. Unknown fighters approaching Tokyo from the south. Suenaga's blood turns to ice. From the south means they're coming from... where exactly? He rapidly calculates distances in his head. The Americans captured Iwo Jima 5 weeks ago, but that's still 650 miles away. No fighter aircraft in the world has that kind of range. It's aerodynamically impossible. As his Nakajima Ha-45 engine coughs to life, Suenaga catches a glimpse of silver glinting in the distance. Not the familiar dark silhouettes of carrier-based fighters, but something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist. All units, scramble immediately, comes the urgent command through his headphones. Unidentified fighters over central Tokyo. Racing down the runway, Suenaga feels a knot forming in his stomach. In 3 years of combat, he's never heard such panic in ground control's voice. As his Ki-84 lifts off the concrete and climbs toward 15,000 feet, one terrifying question echoes in his mind. How did American fighters get all the way to Tokyo? What Captain Suenaga doesn't know, what no Japanese pilot could possibly comprehend in this moment, is that he's about to witness a revolution in aerial warfare that will shatter everything he believes about range, endurance, and what's possible in fighter aircraft design. The silver aircraft streaking toward Japan's capital represent not just a new airplane, but the death knell of Japanese air superiority over their own homeland. The age of the P-51 Mustang's very long-range missions has just begun. To understand the shock coursing through Captain Suenaga's veins, you have to grasp what Japanese pilots knew about fighter aircraft in April 1945. Every fighter they'd ever encountered followed the same immutable laws of physics. More range meant less performance, more fuel meant fewer weapons. Longer missions meant sitting ducks, limping home on empty tanks. The Japanese themselves had mastered this cruel equation. Their legendary A6M0 achieved its famous range by sacrificing armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and pilot protection. The result was a fighter that could fly enormous distances but died in flames from a single well-placed burst. Japanese pilots called it the flying coffin when American guns found their mark. American fighters had always represented the opposite philosophy. Powerful, heavily armed, well protected, but confined to short-range missions. The stubby P-47 Thunderbolt packed 8.50 caliber machine guns and could take punishment that would destroy a Zero, but its combat radius barely exceeded 300 miles. The twin-engine P-38 Lightning offered better range but required bases relatively close to its targets. This fundamental limitation had given Japanese home defense a crucial advantage. As long as American fighters couldn't reach the Japanese mainland, the Empire's experienced pilots could focus entirely on destroying unescorted bombers. Every B-29 crew flying over Japan knew they were on their own once they crossed the coastline. Lieutenant Akira Watanabe, scrambling from Haneda Airfield in his Kai-61 Hien, had built his entire tactical doctrine around this reality. The Americans come in fat and slow, he'd told his wingman just 2 days earlier. Their fighters turn back at the coast. That's when we strike. At 0647 hours, climbing through 12,000 feet in formation with 5 other Japanese fighters, Watanabe spots them first. A formation of sleek, silver aircraft diving toward the massive Nakajima aircraft factory at Musashino. But something's wrong with what he's seeing. These aren't bombers. They're single-engine fighters, and they're moving with the aggressive confidence of aircraft operating from their home base. "Control, this is Lightning 3, Watanabe radios, using his call sign. "I count 20 single-engine fighters attacking the Musashino plant. Type unknown." The radio explodes with confused chatter. Japanese pilots across the Tokyo area are reporting the same impossible sight. American fighters, operating with impunity over the heart of Japan, conducting precision attacks hundreds of miles from any known base. Captain Tomojiro Ogawa, leading the 103rd Sentai from Kashiwa Airfield, has 25 victories to his credit. He's fought Americans in the Philippines over Okinawa and in dozens of home defense missions. But as he closes to 1,000 yards on a formation of the mysterious Silver Fighters, he realizes he's looking at something completely new. The aircraft are beautiful in a deadly way, all clean lines and purposeful design. The elliptical wings remind him of the British Spitfire, but the nose is longer, more aggressive. Most unsettling of all, they carry large external fuel tanks under their wings, yet they're maneuvering like aircraft at the beginning of a mission, not at the fuel-starved end. "Impossible," Ogawa mutters into his oxygen mask. "Those drop tanks should be empty by now." What Ogawa doesn't realize is that he's witnessing the culmination of American industrial and technological genius, the marriage of North American aviation's P-51 Mustang with British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine technology optimized for impossible range. These silver aircraft have flown over 675 miles from Iwo Jima, fought a high-intensity air battle over Tokyo, and still have enough fuel to make it home. The P-51D Mustang's internal fuel capacity of 184 gallons, combined with 2 108-gallon external tanks, and the Merlin V1650's remarkable fuel efficiency, has created something the Japanese never imagined possible. A fighter with a combat radius exceeding 850 miles. Flight Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, diving his Ki-84 toward the American formation, feels his worldview beginning to crumble. If they can reach Tokyo, he thinks, nowhere in Japan is safe. We can't even run. The Americans aren't just present over Tokyo, they're hunting. The lead Mustang pilot, Major Robert W. Moore of the 15th Fighter Group's 45th Squadron, has spotted Ogawa's Ki-84, climbing toward the bomber stream, and banks sharply to intercept. What follows isn't the fuel-conserving, defensive engagement Japanese pilots expected from long-range intruders. It's aggressive, confident, predatory flying. Moore's P-51D, still carrying 200 gallons of fuel, despite the 700-mile journey from Iwo Jima, accelerates in a power dive that would be suicidal for any normal long-range fighter. The Mustang's Packard-built Merlin Vi-16 50-7 engine produces 1,695 horsepower in war emergency power, pushing the sleek fighter past 400 miles per hour in its hunting dive. Ogawa, Realizing the impossible is happening, brakes hard left and dives for the deck. Behind him, Moore's Mustang follows effortlessly, its abundance of remaining fuel allowing aggressive maneuvering that defies everything Japanese pilots know about long-range fighter operations. At this moment, watching American fighters dominate the skies over their own capital with hours of fuel remaining, Japanese pilots begin to understand a terrifying truth. The rules of aerial warfare have fundamentally changed, and no one told them. The engagement begins at 0658 hours over Musashino, and within seconds, Captain Masao Suinaga realizes he's fighting ghosts, aircraft that shouldn't exist, performing maneuvers that defy logic, flown by pilots who should be desperately conserving fuel for the impossible journey home. Instead, the P-51 Mustangs are hunting. Major Robert W. Moore's voice crackles through his radio to his wingman. "Blue Flight, drop tanks now. We've got company." Suinaga watches in stunned disbelief as the American fighters jettison their external fuel tanks, not because they're empty, but because they're preparing for combat with fuel to spare. "That's impossible," Suinaga whispers into his oxygen mask. "Those tanks should have been bone dry 50 miles ago." Moore's P-51D, call sign Dottie, banks sharply and climbs towards Suinaga's Key 84. The Japanese pilot instinctively turns to meet the attack head-on, a tactic that has served him well against fuel-starved American fighters in previous encounters. But as the silver Mustang approaches, Suinaga notices something that makes his blood freeze. The American isn't flying like a pilot at the end of a 700-mile death march. He's flying like he's operating from his home field. The two fighters close at a combined speed exceeding 700 miles per hour. Suinaga opens fire first, his two 12.7mm machine guns and two 20mm cannons reaching out toward the approaching Mustang. Orange tracers streak between the aircraft as Moore responds with a devastating burst from 6.50 caliber machine guns, each firing 850 rounds per minute. At the last second, both pilots brake, Suinaga to the right, Moore to the left. But instead of extending the engagement to conserve fuel, as every long-range fighter pilot must do, Moore immediately reverses into a climbing left turn, chasing Suinaga with the aggressive tenacity of a pilot who has hours of combat endurance remaining. "This is insane," Suinaga pants into his radio, pulling 5 Gs in a desperate climbing turn. How much fuel do these aircraft carry? What Suinaga doesn't know is that Moore's P-51D started its mission with 400 gallons of fuel, more than twice what the Japanese pilot has ever seen in a single-engine fighter. Even after flying 675 miles from Iwo Jima, the Mustang still carries 200 gallons, enough for an hour of high-intensity combat and the long flight home. 3 miles away, Lieutenant Akira Watanabe finds himself in an even more desperate situation. He's engaged 2 P-51Ds simultaneously, and they're coordinating their attacks with a precision that speaks of endless training and absolute confidence in their aircraft's capabilities. "Control, this is Lightning III," Watanabe broadcasts frantically. "These fighters, they're not running. They're not conserving fuel. How is this possible?" Captain John B. Hampshire, leading the second flight of Mustangs from the 506 Fighter Group, has heard the question that every Japanese pilot is asking. Speaking to his wingman, Lieutenant Robert Carr, Hampshire's voice carries across the radio frequencies. "They don't understand, do they? We can stay and fight. We can stay and hunt. We can reach anywhere in their empire and still make it home." The psychological impact on Japanese pilots is immediate and devastating. Everything they've built their defensive strategy around, the assumption that American fighters must turn back at the coastline, has just been shattered by aircraft performing impossible feats 650 miles from their base. Watanabe, his Ki-61, Heian damaged by repeated hits from .50 caliber bullets, makes a fatal mistake. Assuming the Americans must be critically low on fuel, he extends the engagement, trying to outlast them. Instead, Hampshire's P-51D, flying with the confidence of a pilot who knows he has fuel for hours more combat, closes methodically and delivers a killing burst into the Japanese fighter's engine. The Kawasaki Ha-40 engine explodes in a geyser of oil and coolant. Watanabe's last radio transmission, picked up by ground stations across Tokyo, captures the moment of realization. They're not leaving. They're not running out of fuel. How did they get here? Meanwhile, Captain Tomojiro Ogawa, one of Japan's most experienced pilots, finds himself locked in single combat with Major Moore's P-51D over the burning Nakajima factory. For 3 minutes, an eternity in aerial combat, the two aircraft dance through the sky in a deadly ballet of cannon fire and machine gun bursts. Ogawa's Ki-84 Hayate, Japan's most advanced fighter, is theoretically superior to the P-51 in climb rate and turning ability. But theory crumbles against the reality of what Moore is flying. A fighter that has crossed an ocean to reach this battlefield and still possesses the fuel and ammunition to fight with uncompromising aggression. In a move that will be studied by aviation historians for decades, Moore deliberately sacrifices altitude for speed, diving his Mustang from 15,000 feet to 8,000 feet in a maneuver that burns precious fuel. Any rational long-range fighter pilot would be hoarding every drop for the journey home. Instead, Moore is trading fuel for tactical advantage with the confidence of a pilot who knows his aircraft's true capabilities. Ogawa, following the dive, suddenly realizes the trap. The P-51's superior high-speed handling characteristics give Moore the advantage in the dive, while the Mustang's abundant fuel reserves allow aggressive maneuvering that the Japanese pilot cannot match without risking fuel starvation on his own short flight home. At 8,000 feet, Moore pulls his P-51 into a climbing left turn that brings his guns to bear on Ogawa's Ki-84. The 6.50 caliber machine guns fire in perfect synchronization, sending a stream of bullets that tears through the Japanese fighter's left wing and fuel tank. Ogawa's last conscious thought, as his aircraft begins its final dive toward the streets of Tokyo, perfectly captures the moment when Japanese air superiority dies. If they can come this far, if they can fight this long, we have already lost the war. At 0714 hours, just 16 minutes after the first contact, the engagement is over. 7 Japanese fighters have been shot down. 2 P-51Ds have taken damage, but both will make it back to Iwo Jima, a round trip of over 1,350 miles that should be impossible for single-engine fighters. As the Mustangs reform and begin their long journey home, still carrying enough fuel for nearly 3 more hours of flight, the radio chatter from Japanese ground control tells the story of a revolution in warfare. All units report status. How many American fighters are still operational? Are they withdrawing to their carriers? Control, there are no carriers within 500 miles. Then where are they going? Flight Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, one of the few Japanese pilots to survive the encounter, will later write in his diary, "Today I saw the future of air warfare, and it terrifies me. If the Americans can send fighters anywhere in our empire with fuel to spare, then nowhere is safe. The homeland is no longer protected by distance. The age of American air supremacy over Japan has begun, carried on the wings of aircraft that redefined what was possible in the sky." Captain Masao Suenaga never made it home from that April morning. his Ki-84 Hayate, found weeks later in a rice field outside Tokyo with its fuel tanks empty and its pilot dead from a single .50 caliber bullet through the heart, became a symbol of Japan's changed reality. The impossible had become routine. American fighters now owned the skies over the Japanese homeland. The psychological impact of that first P-51 very long-range mission rippled through the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force like a seismic shock. Flight Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, one of the few survivors of the April 7th engagement, captured the moment in his diary. "We have spent 3 years learning to fight Americans who must turn back at our coastline. Now they come and go as they please, with fuel to hunt us like rabbits in our own sky." Within days, Japanese defensive strategy underwent a fundamental transformation. No longer could pilots rely on the sanctuary of distance. American P-51D Mustangs, with their revolutionary range of 1,650 miles, could strike anywhere in the Japanese Empire and still return safely to Iwo Jima. The mathematical certainty that had protected Japan's industrial heartland, that no single-engine fighter could cross such vast distances, had been obliterated by American engineering genius. The numbers tell the story of Japan's new nightmare. Between April 7th and August 15th, 1945, P-51 Mustangs flew 51. Very long-range missions against the Japanese home islands, flying round trips averaging 1,350 miles, distances that would have been considered fantasy just months earlier. American fighters claimed 341 Japanese aircraft destroyed for the loss of only 62 P-51s. But the true devastation wasn't measured in aircraft shot down. It was measured in the collapse of Japanese pilot morale. Master Sergeant Isamu Sasaki, a veteran pilot who survived the war with 38 victories, later recalled, "After April 1945, we stopped believing we could win. If the Americans could send fighters from Iwo Jima to Tokyo with fuel to spare, what else could they do? Where could we hide?" The P-51 Mustang had achieved something beyond military victory. It had created a revolution in strategic thinking. The Merlin engine's fuel efficiency, combined with the Mustang's aerodynamic perfection and massive internal fuel capacity, had rewritten the rules of aerial warfare. Japanese pilots, who had spent years exploiting the fuel limitations of American fighters, suddenly found themselves outranged, outgunned, and systematically hunted over their own territory. Captain Tomojiro Ogawa's final words, recorded by ground control before his Ki-84 crashed into Tokyo Bay, became prophetic. "If they can come this far, we have already lost the war." He was right. The ability to project fighter power across vast distances had shifted the strategic balance irrevocably. Japan's aircraft factories, previously protected by geography, became regular targets for precision fighter attacks. The Japanese attempt to counter this new threat only emphasized their desperation. By summer 1945, experienced pilots like Warrant Officer Kenji Fujimoto were attempting to ram B-29 superfortresses, not from samurai honor, but from the practical reality that traditional tactics had become useless against enemies who could appear anywhere with unlimited endurance. Today, the P-51 Mustang's very long-range missions stand as one of history's greatest examples of how technological breakthrough can fundamentally alter the course of warfare. Modern military analysts still study those impossible flights from Iwo Jima to Tokyo as textbook examples of how range, endurance, and strategic reach can become decisive weapons. The silver Mustangs that shocked Japanese pilots over Tokyo on April 7, 1945, didn't just win air battles. They redefined what was possible in the sky. They proved that with the right combination of engineering brilliance and tactical innovation, the impossible becomes inevitable. The next time you see a P-51 Mustang in a museum or at an air show, remember Captain Masao Suenaga's final question: how did they get here? The answer changed the world. What impossible missions do you think could reshape warfare today? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories from World War II's most dramatic moments.